Good morning, everybody. It's such a beautiful morning, and really happy to have you here. And I think we can just all, with everything that's going on, just take a deep breath and enjoy the day and talk about something incredibly beautiful and relaxing. So really looking forward to that. Just to give you a little bit of background, as Kevin mentioned, I've been here quite some time. I'm an accountant by training, so I'm not a professional biologist or botanist or ornithologist. But I think birds are a really great way to start in nature because birds have there's a finite number of them. You can really learn all the birds in Southern California given a few years and a few field trips. And I started out with a bird book and just watching the birds in my neighborhood. And so it kind of went from there. When I first started working at Tree of Life, I kept a list of all the birds that we saw here. And at that time, it was over 100, probably about 110 species that I saw a lot of them right outside the window from our office. So you can see a lot of birds in Southern California. Certainly, we have a great location here with a lot of advantages. But we have so much wild space in Orange County. We're very, very fortunate. Besides working here at Tree of Life, I have been an active volunteer with the California Native Plant Society for a long time also, and at one time I was the state president of the California Native Plant Society. So plants is a little more my profession. I also like to take photographs, and most of the plant photographs in this presentation are mine, but the bird photographs, I've been fortunate enough for people to allow me to use some really great hummingbird shots. Bob Allen and Mike Evans, who are in the back, they're two of the people that are featured in this talk. So thanks to the photographers. If there's a photo credit, like this one says Gary Meredith, Gary was really instrumental in getting me started on this talk because he shared quite a few photos. And then recently I added a bunch of photos from a friend that I met on Twitter, and her name's Wendy Miller, and she takes a lot of great bird photos, including burrowing owls, and she was just featured on the front of a magazine. I'm not exactly sure what, but she's taken a bunch of hummingbird shots and a lot of them in her backyard. Hummingbirds, worldwide distribution. There are over 330 species of hummingbirds, 115 genera. The Western Hemisphere is the only place that hosts hummingbirds. Half of the species live within the equatorial belt, which is the 10 degrees north and south of the equator. So that would be a place to visit. This little darling here is a representative of some of the spectacular hummingbirds, and all you have to do is get on Google and see the amazing variety in forms and colors. And this one is a blue-throated hill star, which was discovered in 2017, which was the first year I gave this talk. It's been amended since then. This bird is threatened by mining activity. At the time it was discovered, there were only 300 individuals. So with those 330 species here in the United States, we are much more limited. The blue areas show that where only one species of hummingbird lives and migrates to. That's the ruby-throated hummingbird. And then the green, 2 species, yellow, 3 to 5. We are in the 6 to 7 species area. And then once you go down a little further south, you can see the numbers really pick up. Mexico, 56 species. This is an example of a Rufous hummingbird, of a hummingbird migration. The Rufous hummingbird spends its breeding season up north, and then during migration, we will see Rufous hummingbirds, and then the non-breeding season, they go down to Mexico for the winter. So here's our hummingbirds. We're just going to do a little review, and probably some of you are very familiar with hummingbirds, but maybe some of you aren't, and we'll just go over those and look at these beautiful pictures from Bob Allen and Gary Meredith. Anna's is our most common hummingbird. It was probably one of the only ones you'd see in your yard for a while, but Allen's has become more common in the last 10 to 20 years. The males are distinguished by this bright pink gorget, which is an incredible feature, and they're kind of a stout hummingbird. They're not real tiny. They're small, of course, but because they're so common, I guess I sort of think of them as the medium size. This picture Bob took is a hummingbird nectaring from a Manzanita. And then below that, Gary's picture of a female annas on the nest shows that the female does not have, in any of the hummingbird species, they don't have as much coloring as the males in the gorget area. They're much plainer looking, and they might have a little bit of coloring and that indicates a little bit what species there are. And sometimes it can be confusing because juvenile males will have similar coloring. This picture Gary took was taken here at the nursery. Here's some of Wendy's shots, kind of a pretty mad-looking Anna's hummingbird. And then using the flowers in her yard, the male on top, female on the bottom. They have a really beautiful iridescent green back. And a lot of her pictures use the Salvia gregii plant, and she must have a lot of that in her yard. Certainly, they are very popular with hummingbirds. Typically, when someone will pick up a Salvia gregii in retail to put on their cart, there will be a hummingbird visiting before they leave the nursery. This is a 1 gallon Salvia gregii that you could plant from, and these are from Mexico. They are not actually California native, but very popular with hummingbirds. I just love that picture at the top with the different shades of pink. The gorgets reflect that light back to us. Many bird species that have bright feathers are reflecting the light rather than it being actually in the feather. Okay, Costas hummingbird. Costas are a smaller hummingbird, just cute as a button. We have one in our retail area right now, and we've had Costas visiting us for many years. They're typically a desert species, but we do get them. I had one in my yard 1 year, and the way you can tell you have a Costas is because you can hear the male make a beautiful song, and it's very distinctive. You can hear it out in the wild, you can hear it out in retail, and I used to hear it in my yard while I had one. It was such a treat. Again, Gary took that picture of the female Costas hummingbird on the nest. Much smaller than an Anna's, and noticeably smaller. And the male has this bright purple, not pink, Fu Manchu mustache. These pictures, one of our employees, Sarah Bryant, took several years ago, and this Costas was in our retail area, but he hadn't grown out all of his feathers yet. This was in September, so he's already molted, and he's growing the feathers back out. The hummingbirds will drop their feathers once a year and grow them again, just like a lot of birds. Wendy's photos of the Costas hummingbird, just absolutely spectacular pictures, and really give you an idea of the Costas hummingbird. They also have, I think this picture of Sarah shows it pretty well, how it kind of will have a white line down the center of the chest with the darker colors. Thanks, Mike. Black-chinned hummingbirds. I find these to be quite unusual to see, not typically in the suburban areas. We used to have them when we had a feeder outside of our window, but I haven't seen any for a while. Has anybody seen a black-chinned hummingbird? Yeah? Where have you seen it? In Arizona? Yeah. We do have them. Black-chins are a very delicate, long-necked bird, and they you can definitely see the male has this has a band of that purplish blue iridescence as opposed purplish violet as opposed to the gorget that the Costas has. It's a little bit larger, of course, and then it's quite noticeable that there will be a white. There would be, kind of a white line below the gorget line. So when you see a bird with a long neck and that purple and white, that's going to be the male. The female also, you kind of have to get the gestalt of the bird to start recognizing the females. They'll be the same shape, but not the same coloring. Here's another few wonderful pictures and showing that just regal bearing of the black-chinned hummingbird. Calliope hummingbird is quite an unusual bird here. It's much more common in the southwest of the United States, Arizona, New Mexico. This is the smallest breeding bird in North America. The male weighs less than a penny, which is incredible. Hummingbirds have all these things about them that are completely unusual and weird and special. And I have not seen Calliope hummingbirds except for one time, and it was a really cute story to me anyway. One of our employees, Monique Miller, at the time, this is probably 15, 20 years ago, she said she had read stories that Calliope hummingbirds had been seen in the area, and she said, "So Laura, what does a Calliope hummingbird look like?" So I started describing it, and we walked up to our window, looked at the feeder, and on the feeder at that moment was a Calliope hummingbird. And that's the only time I've ever seen one. And I think that's a lesson for birding in that you kind of have to watch, you have to look, because you think that these birds that you're seeing are the same thing you always see, and sometimes they're not. And that's one of the only times I've summoned a bird to me, though. Some gorgeous pictures of Calliope males. What an incredible gorget, the way that's all fanned out like that. Wow. And teeny tiny, smaller than Acostas. Allen's hummingbird is a hummingbird you should see in our area. And it's a really gorgeous, rusty-colored orange bird. And it will have typically have a green back. And the gorget can flash a number of different colors. It can almost look pink at times, but definitely that orange stands out. If you look at this tail of the Allen's hummingbird in the top picture, we're going to talk about Rufous hummingbird next. Allen's and Rufous hummingbirds are very similar, and I believe the only way you can really tell them apart is the tail feathers, and it's something you'd kind of have to study and get lucky to be seeing. I don't know. I think it's a difficult challenge in birding to tell an Allen's from Rufous. So I guess you got an Allen's Rufous, or just you have an Allen's because they're a lot more common. We do have Allen's hummingbirds resident in our area in certain neighborhoods, so they don't leave to migrate. It's another shot of the tail up there. Allen's have thin tail feathers on the edges. Look at that color. Yellow, brown, gold, orange. Incredible. And you can really see the green back on this lovely Allen's down on the shrub at the bottom. Okay, Rufous hummingbird. I guess you just have to take their word for it. I think that these pictures from Gary, that he had been observing this Rufous in his yard, so he knew what it was. But this is an example of a Rufous hummingbird with a green back. But many times Rufous hummingbirds will have, male in their prime plumage, will have a very rusty colored back that's quite striking. This shot by Wendy just amazes me because she got the distinguishing characteristic of the tail feather of the Rufous hummingbird, and that is that notched look on the feather. Can you see that? One feather on each side has that notch. So when and if you get to see that notch, you know you have a Rufous hummingbird. They're beautiful. Does anybody else know how to distinguish the two? Any other Gestalt characteristics? Bob? Okay, that's a good one. Spelling it is. Okay, Hummer facts. Hummingbird flight is quite unique. They have a hovering backward. They can hover. They can fly backwards. They use their wings in a figure-8 pattern. Only hummingbirds can fly backwards, straight up and down, and side to side. I mean, how amazing is that? That's what we have right here. And hummingbirds are very fast. They're fast animals, period. They're one of the fastest animals in the world, one of the top 20 fastest Anna's hummingbirds, and one of the top 10 birds. And an Anna's hummingbird can travel 60 miles per hour, 276 body lengths per second, which is the highest known length-specific velocity of any vertebrate. Incredible structure and adaptations from this bird. So hummingbirds have three basic needs. Their first need, of course, is food. Hummingbirds eat mostly nectar. It's nesting females will eat bugs, and they'll feed their nestlings regurgitation of those bugs. But for the most part, hummingbirds rely on nectar. And they have a high rate of heat loss because of their proportional surface area is very high compared to most animals. So to maintain their body temperature, they have to ingest 1 to 1.5 times their body weight per day. So that's why you see them constantly moving, constantly getting food. I spelled that wrong, or spell checked helped me. Anna's hummingbird, Chilopsis linearis, desert willow. This is an example of a desert willow over here, this tall, pretty maroon colored flowers. It's a great tree for your yard, and it's from our deserts. Okay, the second need hummingbirds have is for shelter. They need trees and shrubs. They need them to perch. They need them for nesting, a place to nest, for protection. And they also use trees, for example, the fuzz from the back of sycamore leaves, they'll use for nest materials. Native shrubs and trees are great for hummingbird shelter, and especially if they're not over pruned, so that they have places they can hide in. And that's true for a lot of birds. Many birds love to use the native shrubs and trees. If you decide to do a tree in your yard, you could start with oak and sycamore. Those are our local main trees, but there's others after that. For shrubs, lemonade berries, a great choice for everywhere in our county. This is a nice picture from Marjorie Manos of I don't have a lot of pictures of hummingbirds using native plants, so if anybody wants to share a picture, let me know. But this is a great picture of this hummingbird nectaring from Ribes malvaceum, which is a local native plant. And then the third need that hummingbirds have is for water. They don't drink water. They use it, as far as I know, they use it for bathing. They wash off the sticky residues from their feathers, and they'll use water from leaves, from a hose spray. I think people have had the experience of holding up their hose and having the hummingbird fly through it, which is pretty amazing. Small waterfalls, fountains, shallow type of water features, or water features that are moving are popular with hummingbirds. On the top here, Acosta's hummingbird, and on the bottom, an Anna's hummingbird. You can kind of see them side to side and see how different they look. Although the Costas looks bigger in this picture, that is not the case. Hummingbirds have a really unique metabolism. They have the highest metabolism of any animal. And a warm-blooded animal cannot be smaller than a hummingbird or a shrew. It's impossible for them to eat enough to maintain their metabolism. So they have bent the edge of evolution. A bee hummingbird is the smallest bird in the world. They have a torpor strategy to survive cold, and hummingbirds have been known to stay in cold areas, and they'll, if they can get warmed up enough during the day. And they will go into, almost looks like a hibernation, but it's just an overnight thing where they sort of freeze up. They might be holding their beaks straight up in the air, or they might even hang down off of a perch and look like they died there, but they're not dead. They'll revive in the morning when they have some sun. I did see one hummingbird in torpor once here at the nursery. So we used to get more cold, but we do get some cold winter nights, and that was pretty cool. And yes, it did revive. Hummingbirds are territorial and aggressive, some more than others. I didn't get a chance to include it, but Wendy has this wonderful picture of an Allen's hummingbird and an Anna's hummingbird going at it, and she says in her notes, "I'm rooting for the Anna's because that Allen's is a big jerk. He dominates 2 feeders." The Allen's hummingbird in particular is a very aggressive bird, and you can hear it in your yard. It has a buzz as it flies, bzz, right through. Their mating flights are distinctive. Anna's has a steep U-shaped mating flight, so the male will climb up high and then come down quickly and take a little U, and then chirp sometimes on the end there. It's doing this to attract the female. And the Allen's a shallow or wider J, kind of a mating flight. And then I suppose some of you has anybody seen a male weave back and forth displaying to a female just in front of it? Pretty, yeah. They also, as you know, and as we're showing here, we'll talk about the plants next. They have co-evolved with these tubular flowers, often very bright colors. So these traits, they make for high entertainment in your garden, and hummingbird gardening is incredibly rewarding because of that, because you get that constant entertainment of the hummingbirds. It's important to conserve our wildlands for hummingbirds and everybody, but also we can contribute a lot by gardening for these animals, and we get something out of it too. We get to engage with nature. Okay, let's talk about some plants. How do you get hummingbirds to nest where you are? The only thing you can do is make your yard attractive to hummingbirds. You can't tell them where to nest, unfortunately. There's nothing that, where you can say this would be a great nesting spot, because they do pick some rather unusual spots, and they'll use different materials. We've had them nest on a nail in our retail area. We've had them nest right by our front door of this office, and on pretty precarious spots with just a little rope kind of holding them in. So they can do a lot, but if you provide the needs for the hummingbird, the shelter, the food, the water, that's what will attract them to your yard and make the female feel like, oh, this could be a good place to raise my young. But it sounds like you did a great job with that. And you know what? They could be hiding. You might have them. Okay, this is our first plant. This is we're going to talk a little bit about Manzanita. This is Arctostaphylos Howard McMinn, which is a very popular garden cultivar of Manzanita. Arctostaphylos blooms in the wintertime, so they're incredibly important for hummingbird nectaring. And this Howard McMinn is a important, reliable, shrubby Manzanita and does great job anchoring your garden. We have a couple Manzanitas here. Hold on. So this is one of the shrubby Manzanitas. I don't know which one. It doesn't have a label on it either. What do you think, Kevin? Sunset? Probably looks like Sunset. Arctostaphylos Sunset, also a lovely shrubby Manzanita that gets new growth in an orange color to match your Allen's hummingbirds. And it's not in the bloom season right now, but it's showing, I don't know the botanical term, but it's showing the little growths for what will be the flowers next year. Mike is saying the Manzanitas don't need much pruning, but and I would agree with that, and especially if you choose the right plant for the right space in your yard. If you have a plant, we do sometimes have people that have more limited space and they want to have a Howard McMinn or a Sunset or even a smaller one. There's many, many varieties and different ones that you can look at, fit into the space that they want to fit it into, and then you certainly can prune it. I have 2 Howard McMinns in my yard, and they've gotten pretty big, but they respond to pruning quite well. This is Arctostaphylos Leicester Roundtree. We have a really wonderful example of this plant on a mound in front of the retail area. It gets pink flowers, beautiful berries, just gorgeous berries. The new growth is rusty colored. This is an outstanding plant. It gets quite large and it grows wider than it does tall. So it's a very wonderful accent anchor plant for your garden. I made a note here that something that Bob Allen taught me. I was writing an article for CMPS many, many years ago, and I wrote about how hummingbirds are important for pollinating Arctostaphylos, and he told me, nope, they don't really pollinate Arctostaphylos. They just use the nectar, and bumblebees and other native bees perform buzz pollination for the Manzanitas so that they can get those berries. But hummingbirds are important pollinators for many plants, just not Manzanita. Here's some more pictures of the Leicester Roundtree. The distinguishing characteristic of that tree, especially that I forgot to mention when I was extolling all its virtues, the bark of the tree is incredible. And there's an Anna's hummingbird utilizing the nectar. They can, sometimes when the Manzanitas are in full bloom out there, there's just constant buzzing and movement of the hummingbirds going after the Manzanitas. Another beautiful manzanita that is, I guess you would say, a tree form or a very large shrub form, the common manzanita, Arctostaphylos manzanita. We sell a cultivar called Bird Hill, and they are very beautiful clusters of white flowers and gorgeous bark and kind of a nice soft green leaf. Arctostaphylos bahauroensis paradise. This plant has a more open habit with very striking pink flowers and gorgeous dark new growth that you can get a hint of here with the rusty colors, sometimes even pinkish. It's a pretty amazing looking plant. This one is at my house. This is Arctostaphylos refugioensis. This is from the area at Refugio State Beach up in the hills a little bit there, and the coastal bluffs. It's quite endangered and has been threatened by wildfire in recent years, but it's very common in cultivation, and we have it commonly here. Arctostaphylos refugioensis is a very fast-growing manzanita. You can put this thing in the ground, and it'll get to a specimen pretty quickly, and can get quite tall. Also, like the common manzanita, those clusters of white flowers. When it's in bloom, the butterflies go crazy. In fact, I was here at a Bob Allen talk. I think it might have been about butterflies or manzanitas, and he's talking about how the butterflies utilize the manzanita, and I really hadn't noticed it. And I went home and I took all these pictures that same day. They were the bees and the butterflies and the hummingbirds were all going at it. Here's some bees, and there's a bumblebee in the middle there below the honeybee, and then the Anna's hummingbird, which was in the middle of molting. That's pretty cool looking at his raggedy looking gorget. The honeybees will steal the nectar from the flowers of the manzanita, and sometimes other bees will do this too, but meaning they don't go through the bottom where they might pollinate the flower. They go through the top, they poke a hole in the top, and they pull the pollen. And you can see holes in the top of manzanita flowers. I think you can see it right here, a little bit, where that honeybee's been having a good old time. Here's an example of some of the beautiful bark. The Arctostaphylos glauca on the left has a lighter color, and then it's peeling right there. It peels every year, and then the underbark is green, and then it turns the mahogany color. And then the Arctostaphylos manzanita Bird Hill on the bottom right, and above that is an Arctostaphylos Howard McMinn. They pretty much all have that beautiful dark mahogany bark. It's just a matter of how do you feature it in your pruning and the particular habit of the plant. This Arctostaphylos glauca, for instance, years ago, it was pretty shrubby, and Mike said, I want it to be pruned up, and they went, basically pulled the leaf. Do you remember, Mike? Yeah. And then so it has more of a canopy of leaves at the top, and the bark is really exposed. Ribes are currants, and gooseberries are local and California natives that are very important for hummingbirds. They are also winter, very, very early spring flowering. These right here are Ribes malvaceum, Ribes sanguineum, and which are deciduous plants. They lose their leaves in the summertime, so plant accordingly. And Ribes viburnifolium, which is an evergreen plant. We have a lot of Ribes viburnifolium here on the grounds, and it's a wonderful landscape plant that also has fragrant leaves as well. And if you take a sprig of Ribes viburnifolium and put it in a vase, it's going to last quite some time. It's a great plant. These are Ribes indicorum, which is our white flowering currant on the left. That's one of our local natives, as is Ribes malvaceum. And Ribes speciosum, which we also have locally in Orange County. Ribes speciosum is a gooseberry. It has thorns. It has pendulous flowers. It's called fuchsia flowering gooseberry, and it's a hummingbird magnet, but it's something you have to plant with caution because it goes dormant in the summer, and it has very wicked thorns. We have some of it in the back if you want to see it in dormancy down the path over there. Okay, epilobium, another incredibly important hummingbird plant. This is a plant that hummingbirds migrate to get to and migrate up mountains to follow as they bloom up higher and higher. And these are some of the beautiful California fuchsia, Epilobium or Zauschneria canem. They're statewide plant that you'll see in many habitats. When you grow an Epilobium or Zauschneria in your yard, they will get kind of leggy as the season goes on, and they are usually benefited by, especially after the first year, they're usually benefited by cutting them quite low to the ground at the end of the flowering season and before the next spring. And then in the spring, you're rewarded with a flush of new growth, and as long as we have a good rain year or you water them. And then they're ready to bloom out for the summer. So it's a perennial plant that benefits from that once-a-year maintenance of cutting it way back. And these combinations are really nice too. Epilobium combines so beautifully with buckwheat. You can see that in the larger photo. Sometimes buckwheats their pale creamy colors can be a little plain in the garden. It's really nice to have that pop of color next to it. And then here you can see how gorgeous it is with just Ceanothus concha, which is a plant that gets purple flowers in the spring, but this is getting into the summertime, so the concha just has its evergreen leaves. Not just, the evergreen leaves are lovely. And then the California fuchsia with it. So looking at these combinations is pretty important with California fuchsia because there's going to be a part of the year where it's not blooming and you cut it down to the ground. Caliander californica, the fairy duster, another hummingbird magnet. Usually this is how we have it and how you plant it. It's quite a small plant when you first plant it, but it can get to be a pretty large shrub eventually. And it responds to pruning. You can prune it however you want. I've had this in my yard for a long time. That picture on the top is my front door, and it has put out a bunch of seedlings. I prune them up to be like a little order. It's a very versatile plant. And it's easy. It doesn't require any water at all, really, although it does respond to some water. Lepichinia fragrans, the pitcher sage, is a wonderful look for a cottage garden. We have several up here, and they're not in bloom here, but these you can see they have these pretty lilac pitcher-colored flowers, and the leaves have a very unique fragrance that I urge you to come up and test out. I love it. It smells great in the garden, too. There are a couple of... it's a very, very fast-growing plant, very vigorous, and so you're, kind of constantly pruning it like a cottage garden, because cottage gardens you're always like fooling around the edges. That's what the pitcher plant is like. Salvias, another plant that are very important to hummingbirds and very important in our gardens, and we are looking to collaborate with the California Native Plant Society to have a sage celebration festival in the fall. So keep an eye out for that. We're really excited about it. We're just in the my cheering section. Thank you. We're just in the planning stages of that, and this is one of the impetus for this festival is this plant right here, Salvia apiana, or white sage. White sage is a plant that's important to our indigenous peoples, and it's being threatened by poaching because people like to use it for smudging. So they'll put it in bundles and burn it, and it's been poached for that purpose and shipped all over the world. And so some of the native peoples have been pretty alarmed to find that their patches of Salvia apiana that were always there are getting cut down. So luckily, we have plenty of Salvia apiana that grows in a nursery setting or can grow in your garden. So this is an example of the beautiful color and form of Salvia apiana. It can be, it has big, tall, arching branches. This is a garden of my neighbors that I helped him plant. Ceanothus concha and Salvia apiana in the background, and then a ground cover coyote bush in the front. And so you can see the foliage contrast is amazing. It kind of accents everything. Also can get, once it goes into flower, the flower stalks go, phew. So it's something that has a little bit of a wild look. This was on a CMPS garden tour, and this Salvia apiana is intermingled with a Manzanita Arctostaphylos sunset, which was the little 1 gallon I was showing you. And here's a close-up with the hummingbird nectaring from the salvia, and salvias are very important for bees also, and butterflies. It's a very important and versatile plant. More salvias. So Salvia Darris Choice is a mounding ground cover with purple flowers. I've grown one that for years that is doing very well in my garden. Salvia Spethacea up on the top is hummingbird sage. It's named because of the red flowers. Hummingbirds are, as you know, particularly attracted to red flowers, red or orange flowers. And the Salvia Spethacea is a popular plant. And we have some here in the gardens. I don't think any right here at the moment. And then Salvia leucophylla, a grayish salvia with a bumblebee on it. Close-up of Salvia Spethacea, the hummingbird sage. It's kind of a pinkish red color. It's pretty cool. And then a Salvia clevelandii. Salvia clevelandii is a very popular and widely used landscaping plant that you can be very successful with in your yard. There's many forms of Salvia clevelandii or cultivars. We sell several of them, and they can get to be quite large. Some of them can be a little bit smaller, though. And they have these beautiful purple flowers in the springtime, and they have a long bloom season, so they're fairly easy to take care of. This amazing looking plant is Trichostemma lanatum, woolly blue curls. It has a reputation for being tricky in the garden because it doesn't like summer water, so you have to get it established. It's from our chaparral areas, and our chaparral plants are a little bit more particular about summer water. And this is, but it's absolutely gorgeous with velvety and fragrant flowers and leaves. The leaves are not velvety, but they're fragrant. They can be used in tea. The picture on the top right is from my garden, and it's been there for that plant is still there. That plant's been there for probably 12 to 15 years. And then the bottom, that shot is you can see the multicolored variegated flowers. The Trichostemma we sell has one color. It's that kind of darkish purple, but in the wild they have different colors that range from that whitish color to a darker purple or a reddish purple. And that spot right there is at Four Corners behind the candy store. There's a beautiful stand of woolly blue curls there. Does anybody know where that is? Up the Ortega. You know where the candy store is? So you drive out there, it's in the Cleveland National Forest. You hit the candy store. Across from the candy store is a parking lot. There's good hiking there on the parking lot side, the San Juan Loop, and there's good hiking if you're even more adventuresome up into the hills behind the candy store. And it's all Cleveland National Forest. Bob Allen allowed me to use this diagram. It's from a paper by Tim Spira. And this shows the way that Trichostemma is pollinated. It's very fascinating. The hummingbird will come into the plant, and the plant parts come down on top of his head. And then he takes it to the next flower. Gambelia or Galvesia johnsia, Grand Canyon, another easy, shrubby, orange-flowered plant that we carry. Penstemons, on the left, the Penstemon spectabilis, very large spring flowering. There's several types of penstemons that will attract hummingbirds in your yard, and they're very beautiful plants that are perennials, but you almost treat them like annuals. They have that spectacular spring bloom. Coral bells, this is one example of coral bells on the bottom right. These coral bells were grown en masse in Rancho Santa Ana Botanic Garden. Here's some more. Another stand of the Heuchera Wendy on the bottom right at the Rancho Santa Ana Botanic Garden. They planted them in big swaths, and they looked absolutely beautiful in the spring. These other two pictures were taken here at the nursery, and the coral bells are a great shade plant. They have beautiful leaves that are evergreen and will stay there looking cute year-round, but then when the flowers come up, I have Heuchera Wendy in my yard, and that plant has been in bloom since February, and it hasn't stopped yet. So they're great plants, and can be fit into a lot of different areas of your yard as long as it's not full sun. My Wendy's actually in pretty full sun, but it's right next to a hose bib, so get some extra water. Monkey flowers, amazing, beautiful plants that are local natives and that support hummingbirds. Lupins, there's perennial lupins, which we have some of. There are annual lupins in our seed mixes, and that many of you have probably seen in large wildflower meadows. And okay, moving on to dudleyas. Dudleyas is one of my favorite plants, and we have some really special ones here at the nursery. And these pictures that I took are Dudleya trascae, with the yellow flowers, Santa Barbara Live Forever, Dudleya pulverulenta, which is an amazing rosette of chalk-colored leaves, and that gets big stems of flowers on top. That plant that is right there is showing the flower stems just starting to develop. And then the bottom picture is a particularly lovely colored flower of Dudleya lanceolata. The two on the right are local native Dudleyas in our area. And 3 other Dudleyas here. They are great in a landscape. They provide good contrast. The hummingbirds love their flowers. We have, as I mentioned, a lot of special Dudleyas here, and Kevin and his team are involved in propagating Dudleya noma via tissue culture. This is a rare plant that's from the Santa Rosa Island in the Channel Islands, and it's adorable. So we're starting to use these in landscapes, but it's a rare plant in its habitat. Munchkin Dudleya, how cute is that? Those are our native succulents. That's all you really need for your succulent garden, in my opinion. Final Hummer notes, feeders. Thanks for asking that question. Honestly, I don't have a ton to say about feeders because to me it's kind of like, why do you even want feeders? We used to have a feeder here, and I think the reason you would want them, it brings them closer to you and probably brings more of them to you. Sometimes, as Wendy was noting, they can be very territorial and only one hummingbird will dominate one feeder. So the strategy for people that are worried about that is they'll put out several feeders, and that will help sometimes. In Wendy's yard, this was the result of her several feeders. These birds just congregating in very large numbers. They are okay. The hummingbirds don't, have detrimental effects from the sugar water, but you do have to keep them clean and stocked, and that's a lot of work. And the cleaning is extensive. And I would suggest anybody who wants to maintain hummingbird feeders to take a look at Google and make sure you look at the protocol for sterilizing your hummingbird feeders, how often, how to do it, using some kind of bleach solution. Does that answer that question? The other thing that hummingbird feeders are reputed to do, and I'm not quite sure, but they make sense, is to disrupt the migrating patterns of the hummingbirds. But I'm not really sure about that. So yes, moving on to the chemicals, insecticides can be damaging and detrimental to the hummingbirds. But if you must use chemicals in your yard, just make sure that you really closely follow the directions. Most people can't believe that they really need to dilute it that much. And so that's one reason why we end up having so much excess chemicals running into our watersheds. And if you do decide to use a chemical for a problem that you're having in your garden, be very, very cautious about doing it at the time of day or the conditions and the dilutions that are recommended. Okay. I want to close by talking, and we can spend some more time talking about more of these plants too afterwards, but just a little bit of a general note about why we do what we do, why California is, because California is so special, why we are dedicated here at Tree of Life Nursery, and why so many of you are dedicated to having native plants in your yard and to contributing to organizations that preserve our native California. So we have an incredibly special and important place here in California, and we have more native species and more rare plants than any other state in the Union, in the United States. And our landscapes can help preserve that diversity and extend the benefits of the wild and preserve some of the pollinators that we're losing, and especially if we start doing it in groups, bigger areas, couple neighbors together, that kind of thing. So everybody, and talking about natives, learning how to grow them so they look nice. There's so many aspects to native plants. It's completely absorbing. And so, I encourage you to keep going and to keep learning and helping out. California is a biodiversity hotspot. 1/3 of our plants are found nowhere else on Earth. And what we do here matters to the whole world. And our California floristic province, which includes parts of Mexico, there are 3,500 species of plants, 60% endemic. So very, very crucial biodiversity is what we're trying to protect and save here. Native plants are the foundations of ecosystems and the basis of the food webs. All life depends on plants, and I guess the soils before that. In California, 50% of land is privately owned. So our built landscapes really matter, and what we put in our built landscapes really matters. There's no substitute for native plants to support the diversity of life. A couple of our charismatic animals that everybody's hearing about: monarch butterflies, monarch caterpillars. They only use the Asclepias, the milkweeds, as their source for food when the caterpillars are growing and eating. But a lot of the butterflies and caterpillars that depend on a particular plant as well. Some of them are and maybe it's not a milkweed, but the other native plants are supporting other butterflies and other caterpillars. And the caterpillars are the most important food source for birds. So if we don't have these things, we're not going to have our bird diversity going forward. One of the things that Tree of Life Nursery is newly embarking on is participating in this idea of a homegrown national park. And Doug Tallamy, who's a famous naturalist and bug guy, has started this initiative. And I encourage you to take a look at homegrownnationalpark.org. It's something that we are newly involved in and will be monitoring and talking about going into the future. All right, thanks again to my photographers: Mike Evans, Gary Meredith, Bob Allen, Melissa Calasan, Sarah Bryant, Wendy Miller, Margie Manos. Whew! I really appreciate Tree of Life Nursery. I've been formed by this place, and my house looks like this place, and my garden looks like this place, and we are incredibly blessed with our hummingbird diversity, but also our bird diversity. Just walk around today, and you can hear it right now. And I want to thank California Native Plant Society and Kristen Wernick for the California Biodiversity info and those slides. Thank you.